The audience, who had been holding their breath, exhaled in unison. It was as if the entire room had shifted into a different kind of Spain, a fiery exchange during a live broadcast. Rosie O'Donnell attempted to undermine Ibrahim Traoré's intelligence with a sharp, unexpected jab, but no one was prepared for the calm, brilliant, and deeply human reply that came next, including Rosie herself. The studio fell silent as she fought back tears, and the internet hasn't stopped talking about it since. The studio lights were blazing hot as Rosie O'Donnell shuffled her papers, her expression sharp and ready. The cameras zoomed in. This, she announced to millions watching live, is a man who claims to lead with integrity. But let's see how much he really knows. Across from her sat Ibrahim Traoré, president of the transition of Burkina Faso, dressed in his simple dark suit. He didn't flinch. Rosie leaned in with a grin that felt more like a knife. "Tell me, Mr. President," she began, "do you even understand what real democracy looks like? Or are you just another strong man who learned a few buzzwords?" The studio audience murmured, but Traoré stayed silent for a beat, his eyes locked on hers. The silence made everyone uneasy. Even Rosie blinked, not expecting him to say nothing at first. Finally, he leaned forward slightly and said in a quiet, steady voice, "Sometimes, Rosie, we confuse shouting with strength, but it's the quiet ones who carry the heaviest burdens." The audience fell completely silent, and for the first time that evening, Rosie felt something tighten in her chest. The next question was even harsher. "You talk about lifting your country," Rosie said, her voice rising, "but your GDP is one of the lowest in the world. Your people live in poverty. How can you sit here and call yourself a leader?" Her words cut through the air like glass. Some audience members shifted in their seats. Traoré didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at her gently and replied, "You're right, Rosie, we are poor. But our poverty isn't just numbers. It's the story of being forgotten, left behind by the same world that judges us now." Rosie opened her mouth, but he kept going. "Do you know what it feels like for a mother to feed her children once a day because she has nothing else? Do you know what it feels like to see your friends die not of war, but of neglect?" His voice cracked slightly. "That's what I wake up to fix, not for me, but for them." The room was still. Rosie sat back. She didn't have a comeback ready, and inside, she felt the first sting of something she couldn't name. Was it shame or something? Deeper. The interview continued, but something in Ross's tone began to change. She tried one last jab. "You talk a big game about compassion, but power always corrupts. What makes you so different?" Traoré closed his eyes for a moment before answering. When he opened them, they glistened faintly. "I am not different," he said softly. "I'm just a man trying to do right by my people before the earth swallows me, too." His words were so quiet, yet they carried through the studio like a thunderclap. Rosie stared at him for the first time. Her face softened. Her hand trembled slightly as she held her note cards. And then, unexpectedly, she whispered into her microphone, "I've never heard this before." Her voice cracked. The audience gasped. An interview, but a moment of raw humor. "If you're as intelligent as people claim, why is your country still begging for aid?" The question was brutal. The audience gasped softly. The camera zoomed in on Ross's face, confident, almost smug. Ibrahim didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Instead, he fixed his gaze on her with a stare so calm, so steady, it made Rosie shift uncomfortably in her chair. When he finally spoke, his tone was low but clear. Because, Rosie, dignity cannot be measured in dollars. The words hung in the air. "Would you rather we stayed quiet, hungry, and invisible?" he added, leaning forward ever so slightly. "Would you rather I left my people to die in silence so you could feel better about what aid means?" Rosie froze. The studio went quiet again. The audience sat there stunned at how he turned her sharpest jab into a mirror. And for the first time that night, Ross's confidence faltered. As the next segment played, Ibrahim stayed silent, hands folded in his lap. But inside his mind, a memory came flooding back. He was 14 again, barefoot in his village. His mother had stood at the market trying to barter their last goat for a bag of rice. He'd watched her face fall when she was turned away, watched her hold back tears. That image never left him. So when Rosie threw her next line at him, "Are you even qualified to lead?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a deep breath, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "When my people were starving, no. One came when our women were carrying water for miles. No one asked if they were okay. I didn't go to Harvard, Rosie. I went to life, and life taught me this. You don't need permission to care for your people." Ross's lips parted as if to interrupt, but she couldn't. The conviction in his voice was like a wave, and somewhere in the audience a woman whispered, "Wow." For the first time since the interview began, Rosie O'Donnell faltered. Her hands tightened around her cue cards. Her voice was softer now, though she tried to disguise it. "You really think you can fix all that?" she asked. Ibrahim's reply came like a warm breeze. "I don't think, Rosie, I know. I have to try because if I don't, then who will?" His words cut through her. Something in his eyes made her own tear up. She blinked furiously, trying to hide it, but the cameras didn't miss her. Trembling lip, even the audience noticed. The room was filled with silence, so thick it was almost heavy. She opened her mouth, then shut it again, dropping her gaze to her notes. Ibrahim didn't press further. He simply sat back, letting the truth of his words settle. And in that moment, something shifted, not just in Rosie, but in everyone watching. The chat on the live stream began to flood with comments. "This man speaks truth." "Why am I crying?" "I've never seen Rosie speechless before." And somewhere deep down, Rosie felt it too. The live segment cut briefly to a commercial break, but the tension lingered in the studio like a heavy cloud. Rosie sat perfectly still, staring at her cue cards, her fingers trembling. Across from her, Ibrahim sat quietly, his hands folded, his expression calm, almost kind. The producers whispered frantically behind the cameras. One muttered, "This wasn't supposed to go like this." Another said, "She's losing her edge." Rosie glanced up at Ibrahim, and for the first time in her career, she felt small, not belittled, not mocked, just humbled. When the lights came back on and the music faded, the host announced, "We're back." Rosie took a breath, but her voice cracked when she spoke. "Mr. Traoré, you said something earlier that I can't stop thinking about. You said you learned from hunger, from watching your people suffer. Do you?" She hesitated. "Do you really believe that makes someone qualified to lead?" Ibrahim leaned forward slightly. "No, Rosie," he said gently. "I don't believe it makes me qualified. I believe it makes me responsible." And once again, silence filled the room. Rosie tried to regain her composure, but her defenses were cracking. The studio lights seemed hotter now, her voice thinner. "You speak about responsibility like it's a gift," she said, her tone softer, almost vulnerable. Ibrahim nodded. "It is," he replied simply. Rosie blinked, clearly shaken. She had come to expose him, to make him falter. Yet here she was on the edge of tears. He continued, "When I see a child without food or a mother carrying water on her, head for miles, I don't see a statistic. I see my mother. I see myself, and I cannot turn away." You see, Rosie, real intelligence is not how well you speak or what school you went to. Real intelligence is the courage to care, even when it's hard. Her breath caught in her throat. She tried to look away, but his words gripped her heart. In the audience, someone sniffled. A camera operator wiped his own eyes discreetly. For the first time that night, Rosie lowered her eyes, unable to meet his. Rosie stared at her notes, but the words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She swallowed hard and finally looked up. I've never heard anyone say it like that before," she whispered. Ibrahim gave her the smallest, warmest smile yet. "That's because most people are too afraid to speak from the heart. CE, one were truth. Didn't need shouting to be heard." Rosie dropped her cue cards on the desk and pressed a hand to her lips. The tears spilled over before she could stop them. She laughed faintly, embarrassed, and shook her head. "You came here to talk about politics," she said harshly. "But instead, She trailed off, unable to finish. Ibrahim stayed quiet, letting her find her own words. And then she said softly, "You reminded me what humanity feels like." The chat stream online exploded. "I'm crying too, Rosie. This man is incredible. Truth. Pure truth." And the world kept watching. The segment rolled into its final quarter. Rosie, still rattled, glanced at her producer, who gave her a subtle nod, reminding her this was her show. She straightened up, and as if summoning her old self said, "But Mr. Traoré, don't you think someone with more sophistication would better serve your people? Someone from a world power, perhaps. Someone who understands global politics." It was sharp. The studio felt heavier now, the audience shifting uneasily. Ibrahim didn't flinch. He simply exhaled, replied softly, "Rosie, you cannot heal a wound from a distance. You must feel the pain to know where to place the balm." "Rosie? But it makes me theirs." Rosie froze. The jab she thought would humiliate him only highlighted his strength. Viewers at home began flooding the live stream with comments. "He's right." First time, Rosie looked afraid. Not of him, but of what his truth awakened in her. As Ibrahim spoke, something shifted inside Rosie. A memory she hadn't thought of in years crept in. Feel that powerless again. And yet here sat Ibrahim.com, unashamed, speaking of wounds and struggle as though they were badges of love. She blinked quickly, willing the tears not to fall. "I don't know what to say," she admitted softly, her voice breaking. Ibrahim leaned forward slightly, his tone even gentler now. "You don't have to say anything, Rosie. Sometimes silence is the most honest response we have." The words landed like a quiet explosion. The audience stared at her, at him, at each other, unsure what to feel, yet feeling everything at once. "Room," a producer muttered under his breath. "This is going viral." It was the final minute of the segment, and Rosie could barely look at him now. Her walls, her bravado, everything she had built over decades in the spotlight was crumbling. The studio fell into an almost sacred hush. Viewers at home, thousands of miles away, wiped their eyes. A breath wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and finally looked him in the eyes. I owe you an apology," she said. Ibrahim shook his head. "No, Rosie, you don't owe me anything, but you owe it to yourself to remember who you were before the world made you forget." And with that, the segment ended, but the story was just beginning. After the cameras cut to commercial, no one moved. The silence in the studio was deafening. Rosie sat there, her hand over her mouth, still processing what she had just heard. Ibrahim sat calmly, almost serene. His eyes didn't judge her. They carried a quiet empathy that unsettled her even more than his words. The crew avoided eye contact, pretending to adjust equipment while stealing glances. A producer finally whispered, "Rosie, we're still live on the stream. They're watching." She nodded stiffly and turned back to him. You know, her voice cracked. "I thought this was going to be easy. I thought I could make you look small. But you—" She stopped, unable to finish. "You don't make someone small by standing on their wounds, Rosie. You only reveal your own." The words struck her like a bell and across the world in living rooms and offices. People watching the stream began sharing clips within minutes. One comment captured the moment perfectly. That sentence, "It will stay with me forever." When the show wrapped, Rosie rushed off stage. She didn't want the cameras catching her wiping her tears anymore. But Ibrahim followed quietly and without judgment. She stopped in the hallway, leaning against a wall. "Why are you like this? Why didn't you just fire back at me like everyone else does?" Ibrahim paused before replying. "Because anger only feeds anger, and I've seen too much pain in my own country to add more to the world." Rosie finally looked up at him. Really looked at him. You actually care, don't you?" "I have no choice," he said simply. "They are my people. Even when they hate me, even when they doubt me, they are still mine. And maybe you are too." Rosie. She felt a lump in her throat she couldn't swallow. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not on camera, not off. The clip had gone viral. Hundreds of thousands of people were tweeting, posting, crying over the exchange. Truth by Tor was trending in 27 countries. One journalist called it the most human moment ever aired on live television. Another wrote, "Rosie came armed with fire, but Ibrahim answered with water and put out a fire inside all of us." Rosie herself posted on her social media later that afternoon, "I learned something last night. Thank you, Mr. Traoré." In Burkina Faso, crowds gathered in the streets, watching the clips on giant screens. People cheered his words, but more than that, they felt seen. In his hotel room, Ibrahim quietly read the messages pouring in. He closed his eyes and whispered, "A simple prayer. Let them not forget." And on her own couch, Rosie sat in silence, staring at her own reflection. For the first time in years, she cried, not out of anger, but out of hope. The morning after the broadcast, Rosie sat in her dressing room, staring at her phone. There were thousands of messages, some hateful, but most deeply moved. One stood out. A mother who wrote, "Your tears last night made me believe people can still change. Thank you." She froze. "He, who Ibrahim Traoré," he asked to speak. "With you." Her hands trembled as she picked up. "Hello." His voice was as calm as ever. "Rosie, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted to tell you. I see your heart, and I forgive what you said last night. We all carry pain we don't understand. I hope someday you see yourself the way I see you." The line went quiet. Ross's eyes brimmed with tears. No one in her entire career had ever spoken to her like that. No accusations, no anger, just grace. And for the first time in decades, she whispered back, "Thank you." As the days passed, the clip of their exchange spread like wildfire. Major? Networks replayed the moment again and again. Headlines read, "Calm defeats chaos." Rosie O'Donnell left speechless by Ibrahim Traoré's wisdom. Social media was ablaze. Grace by Traoré trended globally. People wrote about how his words made them call their estranged parents, apologize to old friends, even forgive themselves. In Burkina Faso, schoolchildren began repeating his sentence like a proverb. In New York, strangers on the subway showed each other the clip on their phones. Rosie released a public statement. "I thought I was confronting a politician. Instead, I met a human being far wiser and kinder than me. The world needs more of him." That night, Ibrahim sat quietly in his hotel room, reading messages from people he would never meet, and he smiled, not because he felt victorious, but because he knew, even for just a moment, the world remembered what kindness sounded like. On the final day of his U.S. visit, Ibrahim was invited to address a small audience at the United Nations. Rosie was there, sitting quietly in the front row. When he finished speaking, there was no applause at first, just silence. Then slowly the room stood and clapped, not for his politics, but for his humanity. Rosie stood too, wiping her eyes. Later, she walked up to him and said, "You taught me something no debate or headline ever could. That real strength is quiet." He simply nodded. "And real change," he replied softly, "starts in the heart." That clip, too, went viral, showing Rosie embracing him, both of them smiling through tears. And for millions watching, it wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about remembering what it meant to be human. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and most importantly, leave a comment below telling me how it made you feel. Your words matter, your voice matters. Let's keep sharing stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Don't just watch, be part of the conversation.